Hello, my name is Harry, and this is Learn English with British Harry. How are you today? I hope you're well. So, today we're going to have a discussion about wealth inequality. And before we do, I just want to remind you that I've created this fantastic ebook for you. It's completely free. You can find the link for it in the description. And it will really help you to improve your English. I've taught thousands of students, and the tips included have really helped my students. Now, with that said, let's have a look at this here. So this article here. So I'm going to read the first paragraph. So haves and have-nots, the 99%, the income gap, the chasm between rich and poor has never mattered more. It's estimated that the top 1% of the world's richest people owns 50% of the planet's wealth. So we can see here that a chasm is a gap. So you can see these two mountains here, and there's a big gap in between. So this signifies the huge difference, the huge gap between the haves and the have-nots, the rich and the poor. Solving this level of inequality is often held up as a grand challenge for the world. But is that the right way to look at it? Some researchers argued that income disparity itself may not be the main problem. The issue, they say, is not the existence of a gap between rich and poor, but the existence of unfairness. Some people are treated preferentially and others unjustly. And acknowledging that both poverty and unfairness are related may be the challenge that matters more in the 21st century. While many people already view inequality as unfairness, making the distinction much clearer is important to improve the society we live in. These researchers argue that we need to all be on the same page as to what inequality actually is. Only then can we direct resources to the places that matter. So, to be on the same page, what does this mean? If we think about a piece of paper or a page from a book, if people are reading from different pages, their level of understanding may be different. So, I have an example sentence here. So, before we make any decisions today, I'd like to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So, this phrase is very common and it's a very useful informal phrase to make sure that we all have the same level of understanding. So, if someone is not on the same page, then they can catch up and reach the same level. Okay, very good. So far, if we have a look at what they are saying, so I think this is a very good practice. When you are reading an article, read a section and then ask yourself the question, what are they saying? Here we're reading for gist. Gist is to understand the general meaning. So we can understand that estimated that the top 1% of the world's richest people owns 50% of the planet's wealth. Now, 1% as a number is low. So whenever I see a number, I ask myself, is it high? Is it low? So 1% is low. However, in this case, it's relative because they're saying 1% owns 50%. Again, 50% is not that high compared to 90%. But if we think about the planet's wealth, if we think about how many people there are in the world, so we have, I think the last time I checked, 8 billion, there may be more, number may be growing. So if we say there are roughly 8 billion people, so half of that is 4 billion. So that's a gigantic number. It's just not a high number or very high. It's gigantic or it's huge. Okay. Then we can see they're trying to discuss how can we solve this issue. Okay, let's go to the next page here. What is it about inequality that bothers us? The fact that some people are rich and others are poor, or that not everyone has an equal shot, or something else? So, this is quite interesting. So, they're asking the question that what bothers us about inequality? Okay. In a paper published in April in the journal Nature Human Behavior called Why People Prefer Unequal Societies, a team of researchers from Yale University argue that humans, even as young children and babies, actually prefer living in a world where inequality exists. Hmm, that's quite interesting. It sounds counterintuitive. So, why would that be? Because if people find themselves in a situation where everyone is equal, studies suggest that many become angry or bitter. If people who work hard aren't rewarded, or if slackers are over rewarded. So, this is quite fascinating here. Now, so the research says that young children and babies actually prefer living in a world where inequality exists. That's very strange to me because the general argument, the general feeling is that we want more equality. We want across the board, especially with wealth, we want more equality. So it sounds counterintuitive. So counterintuitive is in a way that is the opposite of what you would expect or what seems obvious. An example could be when you don't have time to exercise or meditate, is when you need to exercise and meditate the most. I think personally, this is true for myself. There are times when I don't want to exercise at all, but I find that this is the time where I have to exercise because if I don't feel like exercising, of course, if you have an injury, then don't exercise, recover, rest. But if it's just a feeling of laziness or I can't be bothered, pushing yourself builds that resistance. So you build that ability to keep going, you build that persistence, which is very important. But but here when they're saying that children and babies prefer, how do they know? It's interesting to me. How are they able to test if babies can understand inequality? Well, let's find out. But before we do, we have the word slacker. So a slacker is an informal word for a person who does not work hard. And also there's a nice word to describe an emotion, bitter. When you are bitter, you are feeling angry or resentful about something that happened in the past. For example, if a colleague at work got the promotion instead of you, you may feel bitter because you worked really hard. Maybe you were more qualified or had more experience or you had more hunger, but they chose someone else. So here you'd feel bitter. So feeling bitter is not a good thing because it holds you back. You're consumed with thinking about what should have been. Okay. For example, in one study, a group of 6 to 8 year olds was tasked with divvying up erasers among two boys who cleaned a room as rewards. Researchers found that if they told a group of children that both boys did a good job and then gave the group an odd number of erasers, the kids made the unanimous decision to throw away the extra eraser rather than give it to one of the boys as an unfair bonus. So here, divvying, this means to divide up. So this is quite interesting because the boys, they could have shared the erasers, or in the UK, call it a rubber. So they did not share the erasers, which is a bit strange. Why did they do that? Because they had extra. Okay. And yet, when the researchers told the kids that one boy worked harder than the other, the group awarded the extra prize to the harder worker. We argue that the public perception of wealth inequality itself being averse to most people is incorrect, and that instead, what people are truly concerned about is unfairness, says Christina Starmans, a psychology postdoc at Yale who worked on the paper. In the present day US and much of the world, these two issues are confounded because there is much inequality that the assumption is that it must be unfair. But this has led to an incorrect focus on wealth inequality itself as the problem that needs addressing rather than the more central issue of fairness. Starman's co-author, Mark Sheskin, a cognitive science postdoc at Yale, puts the findings of his research succinctly. People typically prefer fair inequality to unfair equality. That's a bit of a mouthful. So I want you to have a read through that while I have a sip of water. So he's saying he's making the assumption that people typically prefer fair inequality to unfair equality. Firstly, I think it's a big assumption for him to make because he does not know every single person in the world to make this assumption. But it is interesting how people are making justifications for their assumptions. Okay. And don't worry, we will come back to this as well to summarize and also to get your thoughts. Okay, and thank you to the people for joining. Thank you for watching now. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's have a look here. So, the reason this matters is that trying to create a world with no wealth disparity is at odds with people's perception of fairness, and that they could potentially lead to instability. A society where no poverty exists sounds rather utopian. But if that society is equal but unfair, then it risks collapsing, argues Nicholas Bloom, an economics professor at Stanford University. So, utopian is a world where it's like an imaginary world where people are happy and people have enough money. The opposite to this is a dystopian where people can think about the bad things that happen in the world. For example, things with AI or the environment with climate change. But in a utopian society, humans thrive. We all care for each other. We are happy. We are achieving our goals. To say that it's utopian is almost dismissive because you think that it's not achievable, but I think it actually is. Okay, we'll go to the next paragraph. So, as reasonable as it sounds, people don't typically work, create, or strive without the motivation to do so, says Bloom. If I'm a painter, dentist, or builder, why would I work for 50 hours a week if everything I'm given is free? From my own experience managing people, humans actually think it's unreasonable for people that skive to get rewarded. So we had this word before, slacker, which is an informal word for someone that doesn't like to work. Skive means to avoid work. So here he's saying, he's giving the example. If he was a dentist and he had to work 50 hours, he wouldn't work as hard if he was given something for free. But you don't really know that. If we think of a world where everyone has an equal amount of money, so think about this. If every human in the world was given enough money to live, to own a piece of land or a piece of property, would they become lazy? Or would they want to be part of the community more? Would they think about how to improve, how to innovate? So here he's just giving his own personal opinion. Okay, let's go to the next paragraph. When you run large teams, there's nothing that sends people mad more than lazy individuals getting the same rewards and promotions as the hard workers. But how can we define inequality? Researchers argue that we need an agreed upon definition of the term inequality. It's important to remember that as we figure out ways to combat inequality, that there are three separate but related ideas. First, the idea that people should have equal opportunity in society, regardless of their background, race, sexuality, gender, and so on. The second idea is fair distribution, which says that benefits or rewards should be distributed fairly based on merit. The final idea is the notion of equality of outcome. So before I continue, I just want to go back here. Okay, so let's have a look at the 3 points. So he's saying first, the idea that people should have equal opportunity regardless of their background. I think that's good. So regardless of your background, um, your race, your sexuality, your gender, you should have a equal opportunity. But this isn't always the case because if you're born into a wealthy family, for example, they would have access to more resources, more opportunities. If you wanted to go for a job and your father or someone you know has connections, they can find a job for you, whereas the other person may find it more difficult. So this is more difficult to assess. The second idea, fair distribution. So distribution means to spread out. So we had that informal word divvy. So divvy is an informal word to mean that means to divide. So distribution is a more formal word for divvy. If we have fair distribution, then things are equally given out and also based on merit. So if we think about a democracy, for example, you also have a meritocracy. So a meritocracy is when people are judged based on the work that they produce. So in that case, you would choose someone who is the best qualified or has the most experience. Okay. So the last one is a little trickier to grasp. Many of the experts BBC Future talked to brought up the phrase inequality of outcome. Say if you were given £5 and your friend was given £10, that represents inequality of outcome since the two of you have different amounts of money, regardless of how that came to be. Each of these ideas represent a different kind of inequality that manifests in everyday life and that contributes to the overarching mega trend that many regular people think of as economic inequality. Recognizing these different dimensions is crucial for formulating a holistic battle plan. So that's quite a mouthful there, but let's break this down together. So in this paragraph, they're saying that inequality manifests. Manifests means to create. So something comes out of something else. So it manifests as something different. So if you have something negative, it can manifest something positive, overarching mega trend that regular people think. So here, it's something which contributes to something quite big. So recognizing this, formulating a holistic. So holistic is when you think about the total. For example, say if you are sick, maybe you have a headache, but you don't know why you have a headache. If you go to a traditional doctor, he may give you medicine like paracetamol, but if you look holistically at the whole body, it may be that you are stressed. It may mean that you may have issues with your digestive system, with your stomach. So holistic means to look at everything together, not just focusing on one specific thing. So which of these types of inequality should be addressed? Which leads to a potentially better society? Fighting the real issue, many of the researchers and economists interviewed, so let's go to the fact, is paid, attention is paid to the fact that the 1% and the super rich all exist. So this article is interesting because for me, they give the idea that it's not about the people who are very rich. They are not the problem because they've worked hard. It's the other people that haven't worked hard. So this is the general idea that I'm getting for the article from the article so far. Okay, so let's finish it off here. I do think that people are likely to respond with greater sympathy to the suffering brought on by poverty than to the harms necessarily imposed on those who are less wealthy than some others, Frankfurt says. This might support appropriate legislation to relieve the disadvantages of poverty. Economic inequality is such a massive, sprawling, nuanced, intensive issue, the product of, the product of complex cultural and political forces around the world throughout history. Okay, so he's addressing the unfairness. Let me skip to the last section here. Depending on your political viewpoint, the way of addressing inequality might be different. Possibly, I think he is still going around the main issue because he's saying that it's dependent on your viewpoint. For example, if we say 2 plus 2 equals 4, it doesn't depend on your viewpoint. 2 plus 2 still equals 4, wherever you are in the world, whatever language, whatever culture, it's just the truth. So here he's saying that it's dependent on your viewpoint. Again, I think which is something used to distract you. Okay. Now, if we have a look at the idea of wealth inequality, how do you think we can address this problem? Is it a problem, do you think? Now, there are a few ways you could reduce wealth inequality. And we know that it is a problem because people are struggling in the world. We have the cost of living crisis. The the prices for houses are increasing, the prices of food, almost everything is increasing. So we know that there is a problem with wealth because the the division between wealthy and unwealthy is increasing substantially. Even in developed and non-developed world countries, that gap is increasing all the time. So we understand, yes, this is a problem. Now, we could force wealthy people to start spending more. But how would this improve the situation? Well, if rich people spend more, then more money is flowing in the economy. And the problem is when rich people hoard. So when you hoard something is when you keep it to yourself and you don't want to share it. It's like the game Monopoly. Have you ever played Monopoly before? I haven't played in years, but I can remember the game. So when you buy lots of property, you're winning at the game. So you're becoming wealthier. So you hoard. You want to get as many houses, many hotels as you can. So you can stop wealthy people hoarding assets. What are assets? Assets are things like houses. It could be a car, something that you own. So, and this is interesting because wealthy people can often hide the amount of wealth they have by buying lots of assets. Now, we could also tax wealthy people more. Now, I want to ask you, should we tax wealthy people more? Is it fair to tax wealthy people more? So, wealthy people, and here talking about multi-millionaires. So, if they're earning more than 10 million, but how do you define how someone is wealthy? Again, it's relative, but we can see that if someone has a wealth of 10 million or more, that's substantially more than the average salary for the country. So that's one way. You can look at the average salary in the country, then look at wealthy people and see how much they are earning. So this is like when I said 2 plus 2 equals 4. You just look at the facts. So yes, you can tax them more, but if they've worked hard for their money, is it fair for us to tax them? It's an interesting question. Then we have to go into the details. We have to think about how did they get their money? A lot of the times there are things like um, you can avoid tax when wealthy people move their money abroad or they buy lots of property. It could be abroad. You have countries like that are tax havens where you don't pay as much tax. And they have access to really good accountants who can help them with this. So they find the loopholes. So a loophole is a legal way to get around something. So I think maybe we should close these loopholes. If we close the loopholes, then it's more transparent. We can see what's happening. So that's one way. We can also increase the wages of people. So this is one way because I've noticed that as things have become more expensive, people's wages haven't increased to match. So, for example, going back 20 years or even longer, if you wanted to buy some bread, it would cost you 30p or 20p or 40p. But now it's almost tripled. So we can see, we can understand it's reasonable for some things to increase. But if our salary is not increasing, then something is going wrong. Something is a bit strange there. So what do you think about wealth inequality? I want you to think about this topic. Maybe research the term wealth inequality. Think about ways of improving wealth inequality. So, like I said, the best way that would improve things quickly and immediately is to have a small tax on wealthy people at like a substantial amount. If you're earning 10 million or more, like a 1% tax, and that money can be used, it can be pumped back into the economy, into the country, and it can be used to help um, essential services, and that can really improve things. But you would get people saying, I'm going to leave because you're taxing me. So it's an interesting balance. Now, if rich, wealthy people leave the country, people think that would be a bad thing. However, it would make more assets available. So more people would be able to buy more houses. So I don't think it's about hating wealthy people or trying to say, okay, you've worked so hard, you can keep your money. The key word is distribution. And in a society, if we have good distribution, that means people have more opportunities. If you have more opportunities, you have something to strive for, to work towards. So, distribution, I think, is really important. But if we think, wealth inequality is just like the weather, it's something that just happens by itself, we are giving away our ability to have critical thinking. Critical thinking is so important. If we think about learning a language, you have the basics, you have your grammar, your vocabulary, but you also have making associations. So you're linking ideas together. And along the way, you're using your vocabulary to express yourself more. So this is a very interesting topic. So I highly suggest that you have a think about this topic in the comments. Let me know what you would do to fix this problem. Have a think about it. Like, I'll give you a question maybe to make it easier. Should we tax wealthy people more? I want you to say yes or no or maybe, and you're not sure. So that's the beginning of thinking about this issue. Now, remember, once again, have a look at my free ebook that I've created for you. Let me go back here. It's really good. It's completely free. The link is in the description, and actively try the exercises. It will really help you to improve your level of English because you're engaged with the learning. So, once again, thank you so much. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for watching. And the people that are here, thank you so much. And for everyone else as well, too. Thank you so much. Have a brilliant day, and I will see you next time. Thank you. Bye bye.